Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the RV Connects podcast. Today, we're breaking down the behind the scenes of our presentation at the 2025 Toronto Spring Camping and RV Show, the physical injuries, the technical difficulties, and the lovely people we met along the way. We're also going to be giving a condensed version of that presentation. We're going to bust some RVing myths, and we're going to talk about building confidence through adversity on the road. So buckle up and stick around. It's going to be a good one. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the RV Connects podcast. We are super happy to be back on the air, and we are celebrating the end of what has turned out to be a very, very busy weekend for the RV Connects. We are just wrapping up the 2025 Toronto RV Show, and we are pretty tired.
We did. We put in a lot of steps. We saw a lot of units. We talked to lots of people. That was awesome. We actually, just by chance, bumped into two sets of friends down there. One set of friends bought themselves a new park model. And then our other set of friends, we think they may have bought a new trailer. We're really excited to find out what they may have done. And the only reason we know that is they've put their Class C motorhome for sale on Marketplace, and we knew they were looking for something. So we're hoping they come with some exciting news. We saw amazing things. We saw lots of accessories. We met a nice young lady who sells some RV sweatshirts and swag and accessories, and she's got a little business. She's 14 years old. We're going to do a separate podcast just with her. Saw F350. 15, my mistake. Very nice lady. I got to sit in an F350. Melina sat in a Bronco. Really lots of exciting things down there.
Mm-hmm. And for the first time this year, we decided to come out from behind the microphone and worked with the Toronto Spring RV Show to do a presentation on day one. That was a little bit out of our comfort zone in relation to the podcast. I think individually, Dan and I are not unaccustomed to speaking to crowds. We both have done it for work. But this was a little bit of a different scenario. I think usually when we do the podcast, we're notes driven when we're behind the scenes. We're not generally in front of the camera a lot. So it was definitely a learning experience. I would love to do it again. I think we have some good ideas about how we might be able to improve that for next year. But overall, I think it was a pretty positive experience for sure. And it kind of gives the RV show like it presents it in a whole different light when you're on the other side of it. And being able to take part in some of these unique seminars and keynote speakers and whatnot that come in, that actually was definitely the most interesting part for me.
Yeah, there's a lot more to the RV show than just walking in and looking at trailers. There's so many interesting stories out there. There's people with interesting businesses. There's people that have gone on some really amazing trips and are planning some amazing trips. And I think that was really what was really interesting about the whole thing. Just learning about other people and their stories.
Mm-hmm. And I am going to give myself mad props for not passing out directly before our presentation. I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast before or not, but I faint at the sight of blood. And when we showed up, we had 10 minutes to set up for our presentation. We were setting up our tripod that was going to hold the camera for the live stream, which we'll talk about that. We had a little bit of technical difficulty there, but I was setting up the tripod and Dan had just nipped to the washroom before we started, and there was some really sharp metal on the bottom of this tripod, and I sliced my knuckle, which as we're filming this, I'm going to hold my finger up so everyone can see my boo-boo, but I sliced my knuckle open, and it was, fairly deep. Did not have a napkin, did not have a tissue, did not have a Band-Aid, and kind of started dripping everywhere. I couldn't walk out to the area where the crowds were waiting, and so I kind of walked out the back door, which was behind this, curtain beside the stage, and just kind of hung my finger outside the door in the cold and just waited for Dan to come back. And with the other hand, I called him, I bet you 17 times, but Dan had his ringer off, everybody.
So I put my ringer off so that we wouldn't be bothered during the presentation and it wouldn't be a distraction. So we did get Melina patched up. She's fine. It wasn't, like she said, she faints at the sight of blood, but we got her patched up, so she did amazingly well, and she was well composed when she got on the stage. The stage was a bit interesting. The microphones that the show provided us kind of conked out every 30, 60 seconds while you're talking, so it was a bit of a halting conversation. I think we had the flow okay, but every so often it would just kind of pooch and then it would come back to life. Well, we managed to get through that, and still everybody stuck around and listened. So at the end of the day, I think it probably worked that way.
Yeah, I think it was pretty good. And for those of you who don't know, and those of you outside of Ontario, and if you're listening to this in a year or two on our channel, the day we did this was election day in the province where we were selecting a new provincial government. And our oldest daughter, this is the first year that she can vote. So she was very nervous about it, and she had a bunch of questions, last minute questions about platforms and things that she wanted to talk through before she went to the polls, and the polls were closing like within hours. So halfway through this live stream, she called my phone, and we could see it. I could see the number pop up on my screen, and then our live stream went blank. And I thought, isn't that funny? Okay, I'm seeing a black screen. But then I thought that, it'll be okay. Maybe it was just something on the screen end. And I thought, okay, well, if the video's gone, the audio certainly would be there, and that was okay. And we could maybe still retain the audio. But then we started getting like messages popping up on the screen, and there was a couple of people in the audience who were also watching the live stream, and they were like flagging us down as in like, oh, we can't see you anymore. We can't hear you anymore. So that was super unfortunate. So we ended up losing video and audio for 7 minutes of this live stream. We got it back. We were able to refresh it in like the next 20 minutes or the last 20 minutes of the presentation. It was okay. But by the end of that night, Dan and I were completely bagged. We were so tired. We decided to get a hotel near the International Center because we were coming back in the morning for a really, really great keynote, which I think we should probably talk about. It was super interesting the next morning. And so we decided that we would sit on the couch, which some of you have probably seen this already, and we kind of refilled those 7 minutes. So we have this weird little spliced live stream together now, but definitely interesting. And I think it was a little bit funny because a lot of the theme of this presentation was building confidence through adversity. And so we had our share of adversity for this presentation, but all good. I think, it was well worth it, and I'm so glad we did it. And I have, some pretty good ideas, I think, about how we might be able to improve or put a different spin on what we bring next time around.
Yeah, you know what? Like everything, you always kind of the day after quarterback it, and you have some ideas. But like I told Melina, listen, we got it done. I'm happy with it. We learned some stuff. We'll continue pushing on ahead. And the next day was really interesting when we got to hear from the president of the KOA. And she came up and gave some really interesting information about the RV industry and camping. It was just a really interesting conversation. Yeah,
it was a really good presentation. She's a great speaker. What I found really valuable is like the depth of analysis that the KOA does on camping in general, and specifically to Canada. She was talking about the report that they produced for Canada, which some of the statistics in that we had actually used the night before for our presentation. So if you ever get a chance, look up the KOA Campers Report, I think it's called, and they put it out yearly. And it's just a really, really good snapshot of the industry and what people are doing and where they're camping, and, how first timers are kind of getting along and what their impressions are of camping for the first time. So yeah, it was really, probably that was like the highlight of the weekend for me.
It was. They really understand the marketplace, and they've kind of divided it up by age groups and generations and first-time campers and seasoned campers. And it was really interesting. You asked a question about Gen Z and how they camp, and it was interesting. Gen Z really wants technology. Her answer was Gen Z really wants technology, say booking the campsite, getting there. Until they get there, then they don't want it at all. And that was surprising to me. I learned something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listen, one of those statistics actually formed the start of our session, and that was that 50% of campers only ever travel within 160 kilometers of where they live, which absolutely knocked my socks off. As you know us, we love to travel far, and we started this channel or this podcast so that we could teach people how to travel further on their vacations from work. And I think, the whole basis of our talk on Thursday was, what if staying close is actually holding you back from some of those really, really amazing travel experiences, some of the best that you will probably ever have as a traveler, right? And I was so thankful for that information to kind of reinforce what we talk about a lot, and just hopefully encourage people to go a little bit further, even when things, don't go super well.
Yeah. So we talked about traveling as a new RVer, and we talked about how you can travel further. And even afterwards, everything was wrapped up and you're just kind of down by the stage and a few people are just chatting informally. Even people who've traveled a while, seasoned travelers, still wanted some more tips on how to travel further. And we're talking about people that have put down some serious kilometers or miles. And so that was really interesting because I think the information applies whether you're brand new or you've been at this for 10 or 15 years. There's always something new to learn.
For sure. And I think some of the reasons that people sort of typically give for kind of staying close or maybe not even choosing camping as an activity is, being with the familiar. People don't want to travel to places they've never been. There's uncertainty around, what happens if you break down? What happens if somebody gets sick, that are keeping people closer to home. And I think there's like this myth about cost, like it's going to cost you fundamentally more to gas up and spend all of that money in gas and, RV parks, et cetera, to kind of go on a really long trip. And there's kind of this desire, this like FOMO, fear of missing out on like other types of typical vacations, kind of like, all-inclusives and trips to Europe and, all of these like far-flung places. But I think Dan and I have talked about this a lot. And I think a lot of this in our experience really comes down to confidence.
Yeah, it comes down to confidence. And when you have a bit of adversity and you get through that adversity, it builds your confidence and makes you feel like you can do something more. And I think for us, this goes back to one of our very first, I think it was our first big road trip, really. We were traveling from southwestern Ontario up to Pancake Bay on the shores of Lake Superior, and that's about an hour, 45 minutes north of Sault Ste. Marie. And we decided we were going to do a loop through Michigan up to Pancake Bay and then back through Sudbury and home. Well, on our first night, we were in Michigan. We were traveling down a nice, quiet Michigan interstate. The sun was a half an hour from setting. There wasn't too much traffic. Everybody was relaxed. The girls were in the back seat, and just up to the left-hand side of the road, I could see a bit of commotion. So I moved over to the right to give them lots of room. And by the time we got up to the commotion, I looked in front of us and there was a dead deer in the right lane, and I couldn't obviously go to the left because that's where the commotion was, and down on our right hand side was a steep ditch. And I looked at Melina and I said, hang on honey, we're gonna have to take this one square. And the deer went right underneath the truck and you could hear it, but I don't think we were too worried. And then we looked in the rearview mirror and the little 8-foot pop-up camper went 2-3 feet up in the air and slammed down, and we went on another 5 or 10 minutes and we could slowly see the bikes drifting out of sight. They were on a rack on the back of the bumper of the pop-up camper and the weld had broken. So we pulled over on the shoulder and there was a sign said, prison area, do not pick up hitchhikers. And so I'm laying on the road and Melina's holding the flashlight, making sure I don't get hit. And the Michigan State Trooper comes up and from his loud hailer asks us what we're doing. There was a little bit of excitement and we explained what we were doing, and he was a good gentleman and just kind of stayed there by the side of the road till we got everything strapped up. And we managed to make it to our stop that night, maybe an hour late, but we got there and we were fine and everybody was safe. Mm-hmm. And we still had a great week.
Yeah, and I think, listen, that's a super condensed version of that story. I think the point of that story, and if you want to hear the whole story, you can go to episode 1 because we share it there. The point of that story is like we were 4 hours into a week-long trip. This was like the first time we were going, super far, and it was, a good like 9 hours. Well, how long was it? 9 hours to get there?
It was probably a good 9 hours at least, with younger kids too at that time. They weren't teenagers. No,
they were tiny. So we were stopping a lot. And, the point was we very easily could have just called it and turned around and went home. And, there was a camping trip not too far before that where we actually did do that. We didn't have propane and it was freezing cold and we forgot food and like there was all kinds of stuff, and we were just like, you know what, let's go home early. And so we did that. And so I'm glad that we didn't, because that trip ended up being one of our favorites. It really kind of keyed our kids up for long road trips. And, that was kind of the whole point of this, is like, you have this opportunity to turn around. What are you going to do when adversity hits? How are you going to deal with it? And, I like to tell the story, and I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before, but we have this really great listener named Lynn, and, she's a great friend. She's come to see us in person before. And she wrote to us. She was like the first listener mail we had ever gotten on the podcast. And she had wrote to us because they listened to that first episode right after they had got into a really bad accident that totaled their trailer. And they were worried about the future. And they were like, do we even want to do this? Do we even want to like get a new trailer? Do we want to get back on the road? And they were sort of, nervous to get back on the road and get going. And she wrote to us after they had listened to that episode and was like, I just want to thank you for putting that out there. It really kind of gave us the confidence to get back on the road. So those type of stories really warm our hearts. And we know, there's so many things that can go wrong when you're traveling. It's just kind of how you deal with it, how you react to it, and if you choose to keep going.
Yeah, I think about you choose to keep going. If a trip is going to go sideways or you're not going to have fun on a trip, it's not going to be around the campfire. Even if your campfire got rained out, nobody's ever had a bad night playing cards in the tent or in the trailer or under the awning. It goes sideways on the logistical side of things. That's where it goes wrong. And I think when you deal with little things like gas, for example, how are you going to gas up and where are you going to stop? If you can solve that problem, I think you're going to have a great trip, because that's where it gets really stressful when you're traveling.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we have a couple of tips. Like gas is a good one. So first of all, and we've talked about this before, we use Google Maps. So if you've got a travel trailer and it can be a bit tight to get into some gas stations and you're probably not necessarily going to fill up at your normal neighborhood gas station, use Google Maps. You can, say, hey, we're probably going to need to stop for gas in an hour, and you can look up a couple of gas stations and you can see if you can get in or out easily. And when we went down to Key West this summer, we did that. We knew that there's kind of getting off at this exit. There's 3 gas stations. We had one in mind. Melina looked at both of them and we made a audible and we took a different gas station, and it made our trip much more enjoyable.
And to specify, because you just always say Google Maps, but I want to specify we're using like satellite view on Google Maps because you can see the entrance and the egress of the gas station. You can see if there's a grade or it's on the top of a big hill. So it just makes it a lot easier to kind of visualize how you're going to get in, and like you have a pump that you can aim for.
Absolutely. And, many of we're a big fan of stopping at truck stops when we can. We'll use something like the Flying J app, and it'll let you filter for RV friendly locations. You can do a number of different things, what kind of services they have, and I'm sure that many other big name retailers would have something very similar. So we'll use something like that. I'm even just a big fan. We have a 20-gallon spare gas tank and we keep it, and it's not going to take us far, but we've used it a time or two and it's gotten us comfortably through a traffic jam, or just given us the peace of mind that we don't need to drive, 10 kilometers under the speed limit and nurse it in like we're in some kind of marathon NASCAR race. So it's good to just have the little things like that. And that makes your trip last.
And one of the things we talked about, which I actually think is probably really key in changing the way that we traveled and sort of reducing the stress for long trips, is that we stopped planning places to stay. So our first couple of long trips, and that one where we had the deer incident was one of them, where we had booked that particular night. We had the pop-up trailer, so we knew we weren't going to be setting it up in the middle of the night. But we booked a hotel in like Flint, Michigan or something to stay overnight. And we still had a fair ways to go. And this took a lot of time to solve the bike rack situation and strap everything up so bikes weren't dragging on the ground. And so we got there really, really late. But there was a ton of hotels closer than that, but we had already kind of booked and paid for this hotel. So we had to get to where we were going. And that just kind of raises the stress level a lot. So we decided not to do that anymore. So we very rarely, if ever, will book a place to stay. So we'll use usually the app called RV Parky. And when we know we're like about an hour or two from being done, or we stop for dinner and we say, okay, we're going to go another 2 hours maybe, we'll look up places to stay from there. And that will have everything from boondocking locations to like privately owned RV parks to KOAs to, you name it, right? And so in all of the 40,000 plus kilometers that we've traveled, we have never been left without a place to stay. But it just is so much less stressful not having to aim for a specific point, so we can travel more on how we're feeling, how we're vibing, and what our energy levels are, rather than like a specific mile marker.
Right. And to be clear, the final destination, we book a site. Like when we're in Key West or Pancake Bay or where it might be, we've booked a a final destination, we've booked that site. But on our way there, we don't. And when you're feeling strong, you go a little further. When you want to break, you pull up short. And it's actually given us some really great experiences. We used it coming home on our Route 66. We stayed at the Illinois State Fairgrounds. And that was where we saw the Lincoln Tomb. And we never would have found that had we not done that. And so it's one of the good memories of that trip.
Mm-hmm. What I would say as well on sort of like the stress front and adversity is like the best way to deal with adversity is to prevent it. And so we fully recommend having a shakedown trip. This is something we still do because we always will find out, like, we're out of batteries, we forgot this doesn't work, this is leaking, whatever it is. Having a shakedown trip is super important. So
yeah, and we still do that close to home. Sometimes we only go 20 minutes from home because there's a couple of great parks near us. Sometimes we'll go 30, 45 minutes close to home. We've had some shakeout trips where we've called it off and come right back home, but I think a shakeout trip is good because, we close the door in the trailer every October and we're like, we're ready to go. We can just pop in there and we can hit the road as soon as the first nice weekend comes in the spring. And yet we do a shakeout trip and we're like, I don't know what we were thinking in October.
Mm-hmm. Another important part, and we mention this a lot, but maybe not often enough, is that I think it's so important for both spouses to know how to operate the rig. Every aspect of that rig, both of you should be able to know, whether it's your spouse, your travel partner, your child that you travel with that's an adult and can operate everything, but knowing how to drive the trailer, back it up, parallel park it if you need to, know where the reservations for your sites are, know how to gas it up, know how to empty your black water and your gray water. Those are all super important because it takes the stress off the other person who normally does that. And it's okay to have specific jobs that each person does. And I think, in a relationship, you always fall into that avenue where like you do certain things and I do certain things. And that's just kind of the natural order, and that's okay. But there is this inherent stress on somebody. If Dan was doing 100% of the driving and 100% of everything else, and he was laid up with the flu, we're basically stuck, right? Mm-hmm. We can't get on the road until you feel better. Whereas if you're not feeling well, you can lay down in the truck and, we can hit the road and go. And everybody knows how to hitch up and get on the road without you.
The other part, absolutely. The other part I'll add to that is there's probably a couple of systems you may not ever use. Hopefully you never have to use them, but you should at least know about them. If you have an electric jack on the front of your trailer, there's probably a manual override in case it conks out. You should know how to use that. And we've used that once or twice. Maybe a battery's pooched or a blown fuse. So we've done that. The other thing is if you have a tip out on your trailer, there's a manual way to bring in your tip out. We've never had to use it, knock on wood. Think of all the good luck charms you can right now and wish us well. But I know there's a spot to do it, and I know there's an adapter, and I know it's in the cutlery drawer. And if I have to do it, I'll check the manual. But at least I know that I'm not going to panic. I'll just have to take a few minutes, read the instructions, and I can bring it in. And that's another area where maybe you want to know just a couple of more systems about your trailer that you might not use every trip.
Mm-hmm. And one of those would be, you probably know it and you have known it at one point in time, but maybe it's not sitting in your brain, and that is the exact height of your rig.
Yeah, you should probably know the height of your rig. We have maybe found this out the hard way. Fortunately, we've never had an accident. We went through St. Louis. I made a wrong turn going through St. Louis. They won't let Dad live it down, but we came up to a low-hanging bridge and it was tagged at 13 feet, and we thought we were about 12 feet, and we thought we would be okay, and we were nervous, and then, there was a truck in front of us, but he wasn't super tall either, and he made it, and we went for it, and fortunately, it all ended well, but, we did put a little cheat sheet underneath the visor in feet and meters, and we know now that our rig is 12 and a half feet tall, not 12 feet tall. So, mm-hmm. And we used that this summer in Key West. We, got onto a bit of a detour in downtown Jacksonville, and we were about to turn left, and we looked over and saw a bridge tagged at 9 feet, and we knew that we kind of had to turn right and find a different way through the city. But, there's two instances where it was good to have readily available just to do a quick reference check.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Do you want to talk a little bit about the spare tire? Because I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we've talked about keeping a toolkit in your car, something that's got some sockets, some wrenches, some screwdrivers, some pliers, something that you would pick up at, like, say, Canadian Tire, Harbor Freight, Princess Auto. I found out that the tire iron and jack in an F-150 are not the best tools to change the spare tire on a trailer. So the jack would obviously work, but the tire iron doesn't because they're different size lug nuts. So because I had the toolkit, I could make the change. That all ended well, but this spring what we're going to put in is a breaker bar, the correct socket set, and maybe a little bit more of an I wouldn't say an industrial jack, but something a little more heavy duty to do a tire change. So there's some stuff where if I hadn't known that, it could have been late at night and we would have been waiting for a, roadside service to come change a tire for us, but we've got everything in there to do it now this time.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we talked about as well were the sort of basics that you need. And we're not going to go into that now because if you go back literally one episode to episode 53, we talked about some of those like not so shiny basics, like not the really exciting basics, but the basics that you need to kind of run and protect your trailer. If you are interested in all of the things that we personally use, you can just go on our website, rvcanucks.com/RV basics. And that just has a listing of everything we use and why. But I think at the end of the day, if you are new to this, if you are new to RVing, if you just bought your first trailer, you want just at the very basic minimum, something to level your trailer, something to protect your power system, something to protect your water system, and, a good toolkit, fuses, all of that stuff that Dan just mentioned.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think two of our biggest purchases that give us peace of mind is a surge protector that did not cost us a lot of money, and a water pressure regulator, which protects a potential for a blown water fitting inside the trailer, and they're just peace of mind to prevent future calamity.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll breeze over some of the considerations on picking a rig on that same topic if you're kind of brand new to this. We do have a really full-length, fundamental podcast episode on that, and that's kind of what to consider when you're looking to buy or upgrade an RV. So go check out that episode for more because it gives such a good, like Dan does a really good job of breaking down kind of every aspect, but maybe we'll just give a very high level talk about one of, some of the really important things when you're looking.
So high level, I think the first thing you need to know is what your weight budget is, because you're going to exceed your weight budget. Well, you're going to potentially exceed your weight budget before you exceed your financial budget when you're going to purchase a new trailer. So by that, I mean, know how much your tow vehicle can tow, and then you're going to select a trailer that fit, or, a fifth wheel, whatever it might be. You're going to fit something that fits within those specifications. So the weight is really the important thing that you need to know, because you don't want to overload your tow vehicle. And then if you're overloaded, that gives you braking problems. And I mean, you can see how this begins to spiral out of control. So stick within your weight budget. One of the great things for preventing, disaster going down the road.
Talking about length budget, I think there's a couple of important considerations. One, where you want to store it. If you plan on storing it in your driveway, obviously you need to make sure it's of a particular length. But not only that, you're going to want to check your bylaws wherever you live to make sure there's no fundamental bylaws against keeping your travel trailer in, or your RV in your driveway. The other thing you want to consider is where you want to camp the majority of the time. If you are getting into this and you know that you want to be a provincial park camper and a national park camper, and that's pretty much going to be 90% of your trips, you probably want to choose something that is like, maximum 35 feet to make sure that you can get a spot in any park that you want to go to. And we see a lot of people pushing this. We see a lot of people giving really bad advice on the internet about how you can push it, even if, a site is rated for, say, 35 feet and under, yet somebody will read the specific description of that site and it says, but it's 50 feet long and, 15 feet wide. Oh, well, we're going to be able to do it because it's 50 feet long. In actuality, the way that site lengths are determined is not just the length of the pad that your wheels are landing on. It has to do with turning radius. It has to do with obstacles, trees, rocks, drop toilets, anything that's blocking the way that you need to get into your site from. So please keep that in mind so that you are not disappointed. But those are kind of the two major considerations from a length standpoint.
Yeah, and there's advantages to length. The longer the trailer, probably is going to sleep a few more people, have more conveniences. Maybe it's a little bit more luxurious, so that's the advantage of a long trailer. One of the other things a long trailer is the longer the trailer, the easier it is to back up within reason, right? If you sneeze with an 8-foot pop-up camper, you're all of a sudden jackknifed. But a 25-foot trailer is more forgiving. So that's one thing to consider. So that kind of is counterintuitive, especially if you're new RVer, that maybe a longer one might be easier to back up. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is think about the long-term flexibility of your trailer. There's a million stories of somebody who bought a 20-foot trailer and all of a sudden in 2 years they need to upgrade to a 27-foot because it wasn't their family change. They found that they really enjoyed it. They wanted something bigger. So in our particular case, we looked at a used trailer, we looked at a 27-foot trailer, and we looked at a 29-foot trailer. And the price difference from the least expensive to the most expensive was $2,500. So we went with the 29-foot trailer. It's a bunkhouse, and that has really done us well. So first of all, we in 10, 12 years or so, give or take, we haven't upgraded. That trailer has really evolved with us. So initially the bunkhouse was great because the girls could go in the back with their stuff and their mess and their food when they were little and have a great time, and we could close the door and we had fun. And then, as they got a bit older, they brought friends, and the friends could stay back there and teammates would stay back there. And then, our parents can stay back there. And so that trailer has really evolved for us and given us a lot of longevity. And we haven't had to continually swap out trailers every 3 or 4 years.
But what I would say is when we purchased that trailer, within a year, we bought a new pickup truck. And that new pickup truck definitely could have allowed us to get the trailer that had, say a slide out in the bunk room to give that extra little bit of space. But we were towards the top end, I would say, of our weight budget with the old pickup truck that we had. So if we were to do this again, I think we would, figure that out kind of in tandem rather than kind of a year apart, because I think we could have got maybe a little more space. But I mean, it's worked out well. We love our trailer, but it is a consideration where as soon as we bought that truck, we're like, oh, darn, we could have got that other trailer that we were looking at.
I'm happy.
Yeah.
I think what I'll tell you is, we have good friends and they have made a completely different choice. They have a Class C motorhome. They have 7 people in their family. They don't bring a toad. They accept that if they forget a bag of milk or they need to get firewood and they've forgotten, they're going to either have to get on their bikes or, unhook all of the services and drive to go get that. But they're really happy with that. So there's something out there for everybody, whether it's a Class B van or it's a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. There's something out there for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the episode, we talked a lot about kind of the uncertainty and the FOMO and all of the things that were preventing people from really going a long way on their trips. And one of the things that we realized pretty early on is we had some bias around how we camped. And for us to be successful campers and to be successful RV lifestylers, we really had to break the bias that we held. Well, number one was that tent camping was far superior to everything else that's out there. And we found, as we got married and had kids and had really terrible weather, especially one year when we camped and had a river running through our tent, that, okay, well, we broke that bias. We were ready to go to a little trailer. And then it was only provincial parks. You're not really camping if you're at a KOA. What is that? And then we found out really quickly, we could have some really excellent, amazing adventures that rival anything where you have to take an airplane to get to. And it's just, it's a whole different way of looking at it. And like Dan always says, there's no right way to do this.
Yeah, I think the statistic was around 50% of people only camp in provincial parks, state parks, or national parks. And in my mind, you're cutting out 50% of the opportunities to have an amazing experience and make memories. And that's really why we go RVing, right? We don't go RVing to say we have a badge of honor that we only stay in a particular type of park. I would like to think we'll all try something, because one of the things I tell people is even if you're in a bad site, you're probably only there for 2 nights. You're not going to remember that. I don't even know if you'll remember that in a month or 6 months, or even certainly not in 5 years, right? So give it a try. If it doesn't work, you don't go back. You live and you learn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important. And for us to kind of branch out too, we made an effort to do different things with our RV. We started doing festivals and events where we would bring our trailer as opposed to just being day visitors. And that's actually turned out to, it lends itself well to kind of the immersive experience of what that event is bringing you.
And when we talked also, earlier we mentioned FOMO. You know, people worry about missing out on another type of vacation. I'm a big proponent of a hybrid vacation. It's okay to travel in your RV. Maybe you'll travel for a week, maybe you'll travel for a week and a half, and then maybe you're going to swap into a hotel, and maybe you're going to stay at a resort. And we did that this summer. We stayed at Disney in a resort proper and parked the trailer for a few days. Maybe you're just going to drive down the road and you're going to stay in at the Holiday Inn Express and pull in and park out back where the trucks are, because that's going to help you get down the road quicker. So don't think you have to do it one way.
Mm-hmm. And I would say to those who, you know, I was thinking about this when we were doing preparation for this presentation we were doing, and all of the ways that people like to vacation and all of the vacations that they brag about. And like, listen, Dan and I are fairly well traveled when it comes to kind of, you know, traveling across the pond and traveling across North America and hopping on flights to get to places and, you know, non-camping vacations. And I think there's really not a single type of vacation, maybe except for a cruise, that you can't replicate in an RV. And some examples that we always love to give are, you know, if you love kind of that old European kind of castle-y vibe, go to Quebec City, go to St. Augustine in Florida. Those are two of the oldest cities in North America. They have been owned by, you know, say the Spanish, the French, the British, you know, and back again. Like, it's just, there's such a storied history. There's forts, there's, you know, really old buildings. Go to Newfoundland and take a ferry to Saint Pierre and Miquelon, which is a French overseas territory. You need your passport to get there. It's essentially France on a little island, you know, just off the coast of Newfoundland. If you like history, you know, you can't throw a stone on the East Coast, whether that be the East Coast of America or the USA or the East Coast of Canada, where you don't hit some kind of historical site. If you love Jurassic history, go out to Alberta. You can see Drumheller. You can see Dinosaur Provincial Park. If you love city lights, you can go stay at, you know, Bronte Creek Provincial Park, just down the road from Toronto, and take the GO train into the city and go see a Jays game, or, you know, experience the Hockey Hall of Fame, or just anything that Toronto has to offer. And we have stayed at the foot of the Las Vegas Strip in an RV park, which was like one of our favorite RV resorts. It was really swanky as far as RV, you know, resorts go. We had the kids with us. They had a great time in Vegas. If you love a Caribbean vacation, we'll talk to the island boy over here. He knows that if you stay at the southernmost KOA in Sugarloaf Key, you are going to feel like you are having that Caribbean resort vacation.
You absolutely are. You're going to feel safe. You're going to feel secure. You're going to have all of your stuff with you. So we're big proponents of it. I love that the geography can change so much in a day. You can leave Thunder Bay, and by the time you get to Winnipeg, you're at the start of the prairies. You can be at Drumheller, and by supper time, you can be in Banff in the mountains. And it's something completely amazing. I think what I will tell everybody is there's no wrong way to RV. We don't RV in a Class A motorhome. There's no wrong way to RV. We don't RV in a Class A motorhome, but they're not doing it wrong either. So do what feels right for you, and don't feel the pressure to conform to somebody else's ideas. We're just here to throw out some tips to hopefully broaden your horizons and let you go a little further than that 160 kilometer barrier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself.
I nailed it.
Yes, you did. Okay, so that's it for this week's episode. Check us again in a couple of weeks. I think by that point, we'll probably have a really good idea of all of the places we are nailing down to go in 2025 on our new season adventures, I guess. And so we will be prepared to at least share some of that with you. And we're very excited to see you again soon.
We are. It's exciting times. We're planning vacations and figuring out what time people can get off work.
Okay. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.